Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we can meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing a truly evil woman named Diane Downs. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. All right, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this is one of my condensed crime videos, which basically means this is for people who want short form content. This is for people who want to get in, get out, and get on their way, or for people who just want a little bit more of me throughout the week. So if that is you, cool. If that's not you and you like just my long form content, make sure to check in on Mondays because that's where I'm still doing my deep dives, my hour-long videos, my two-parters, things like that. So today I'm going to tell you the story of Diane Downs. She's an evil woman who tried to kill all of her children and succeeded in killing one of her daughters. It's really, really horrible. But at the end of this story, I want to ask you the question of the day. And I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain throughout this video. And that is this. What do you believe was Diane's motive for trying to kill all of her children? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below at the end of this video. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of a truly evil woman named Diane Downs. Our story begins on May 19th, 1983 in Springfield, Oregon. It's just after 9 p.m. and Diane and her 3 children are driving home from a friend's house down this long, dark, scenic route going towards home. I guess this is something Diane and her kids like to do. They like to take long roads that were less traveled, places they hadn't been before, and kind of take in the scenes at night. So she's doing that. She's driving along. Her kids are sleeping in the car with her when all of a sudden she sees this, quote, bushy-haired man. Well, actually, I think it was bushy-haired stranger. She sees this bushy-looking dude who's flagging her down, so thinking he may need some help, she pulls over. Once Diane pulls over, she looks at her 3 sleeping children who were in the car, sleeping. Yeah. This is Cheryl, who's 7 years old. She's sleeping in the front seat. Christie, who was 8, she's in the back seat. And Steven, who was 3, and he was also sleeping in the back seat. So she decides to get out of the car and leave her kids sleeping in the car to go see what's up with this man. As soon as she approaches him, she says that he's like, listen, give me your keys, I'm stealing your car. Which sounds really terrifying and really serious, right? Well, Diane responds to him, you gotta be kidding me. She says that the two then start to fight. She starts fighting with this man who apparently has a gun. She says that he shoots her in her arm and then proceeds to shoot her 3 children who are sleeping in the car. She said during the fight she had thrown her keys into some bushes, or pretended to throw her keys into some bushes, and that while the man was distracted, she jumped back in her car and took off driving as fast as she could to the hospital to try to get her kids some help. Upon arriving at the hospital and the kids being inspected, it's found that Christie has been shot twice in her chest and has suffered a stroke as a result of her injuries. Baby Steven was also in bad shape. He had been shot in the back, which is weird. I don't understand how he was shot in the back. Maybe he was trying to get away. I don't even want to think about it. 3 years old. Absolutely not. But he was shot in the back, and he, as a result, was paralyzed from like the waist down. And then Cheryl. Cheryl was pronounced dead. She did not survive her gunshot injuries, and she was only 7 years old. So, based on my intro, you now know that everything I just told you about what happened was a fucking lie. This is what Diane said happened, but you know, that's not what happened because Diane's actually the one who shot her kids. But before we get into the story of why she did it, we don't really know why she did it or what she did or what exactly happened. Let's first go back a little bit and talk about who Diane was, and then we'll get into what happened after she shot her kids. So Elizabeth Diane Fredrickson, who went by Diane, was born in Phoenix on August 7th, 1955. That's where she grew up, and she was one of 3 kids, and she grew up in a very conservative household. As a teenager, she went to Moon Valley High School in Phoenix, and she was said to sort of start to rebel against her parents a little bit and just kind of come into her own person. And she was particularly into boys. And her parents weren't really into that because, like, again, they were pretty conservative and they wanted her to focus on things that were more important at that time and not, like, just trying to get at those dudes. But Diane just simply could not be tamed in that arena. It was while in high school that Diane met a guy who she had a little bit of a crush on, a guy who was a little bit older than her, and this was a guy named Steven Downs. Diane Downs, you get it? Cool. So they start dating and they do the thing for a little while, but then, you know, high school's over, he's going on to do his thing and she's going on to go to the Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College. The amount of times I had to say that to get that right, you would not believe. But she goes there, and they decide they're going to kind of do the long distance thing for a while, you know, try to make it work. But it doesn't, because Diane ends up getting kicked out of school, and she gets kicked out of school for being promiscuous, which means she, you know, cheated on Steve a little bit. And I was like, you can get kicked out of school for being promiscuous? But then I was like, Bible college. Okay, that makes sense. So now Diane, finding herself kicked out of school, she goes back to her hometown, you know, be with her family. And while she's there, it turns out Steve has come back into town as well. So they, you know, being in person again, sort of rekindled their relationship and somehow worked through the issues that they had and the fact that Diane cheated on him. And they ended up getting married in November of 1973. And after getting married, they went on to have 3 children. I was going to say together, but we'll get there. This was Christie, followed by Cheryl Lynn Dale, no, and Steve, baby Steve, named after his father, who went by Danny because his middle name was Daniel. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, Steve and Diane didn't have like a great relationship. It didn't help that she had like cheated on him in college. That is sometimes a hard thing for people to get past. Not to say you can't. People can totally get past infidelity, stay together, be faithful, be cool, or have rules, whatever. Each relationship's different. But in their relationship, it wasn't good. There was a lot of fighting. They would fight about whether or not Diane was being faithful. Diane would fight with him because she would feel like she wasn't getting enough attention. She wasn't getting enough love. She was feeling lonely and isolated because Steve had a job and would go to work and was often out of the home. So while he was gone, working and doing his thing, Diane was having affairs and banging dudes, being real rude. And it's actually sad because remember when I said they had 3 kids together and then I was kind of vague about it? Well, I said that because it turns out little Stephen Daniel, who was named for his father, literally had his name. Well, it turns out Danny wasn't actually even his biological kid. And Steve knew this, and despite that, stayed with Diane, kept their family together, and raised Danny as his own. Even though he stayed with her, it wasn't like easy to be in a relationship with Diane. The two would fight a lot, as I said, and when they would get into fights, Diane would just like dip. He would like go to work and she'd be like, okay, kids, let's go. And they'd like go to her mom's or parents. They'd just disappear. And then he'd have to go. He'd have to track him down. And then he'd meet up with her and he'd be like, can you not? And she'd be like, okay, you're right. This is childish. I won't do it anymore. And then the next time they got in a fight, she would go right ahead and do it again. And eventually the relationship just got to be tiresome and they ended up getting a divorce after less than a decade of marriage. After the two divorced, Diane decided that she wanted to leave. Her and her kids picked up and moved to the great state of Oregon, my favorite state. Well, one of my favorite states that I've ever been to. And it was while, you know, living alone with her kids in Oregon that Diane realized that like being a mom and being like a single mom at that just like wasn't really something she was super into. I guess she did everything she could to be out of the house because she didn't want to be around her kids. She would like work a lot. When she wasn't working a lot, she would go out a lot, leaving the kids with either a babysitter or just to fend for themselves, even though they were like literal little babies, which is just like a heartbreaking thing to think about. But it's just because she didn't really want to do it. And even when she was there and she was doing it, she was said to not be like a great mom, that she was kind of mean to them, not super nice to them, which isn't surprising considering what she went on to do. And she would just blow up at them at like the smallest thing, which is very sad. Like it makes me fucking pissed actually is what it does. Now that I have a baby and I can like put it into perspective and I know that you have to keep it in because like they are children, they are babies, and like it's your job to like not be a bitch. Sorry, but not sorry. Like it makes me mad. Anyways, she's in Oregon, living her best life, being shitty to her kids, and she gets a new job. And it's while this new job that she meets a new man, a man that she would go on to care a great deal about, and his name was Robert. So she's into him. She's heading down this road, heading towards love. Here's the road, there's love. She takes a hard left towards infatuation that turns into obsession. Like writing him one letter every single day, Noah to Allie, but not in a romantic way, obsession. But there are some issues that would make these two not a super great fit, right? There are 2 main things. One, he's married. I guess they were separated at the time, but like separated. He's still married. And 2, he doesn't like or want kids, and Diane has 3. All right, so now you have an idea of who Diane was on like a surface level sort of way, right? We don't know her, we haven't met her, but this is like what we know so far. And this is the woman who shows up at the hospital with her 3 children shot. Her arm wrapped up in a towel, bleeding, her trying to stop the bleeding, while her kids mind you, don't have any dressing to their wounds. She just left them to sit there and bleed. She learns that one of her daughters is dead, one has suffered a stroke, and her little boy is now shot and paralyzed from the waist down. You'd think this would be the most horrifying news you could ever hear as a mother. When I hear it, I'm like, I would jump off a fucking bridge. Like, I don't know what I would do. Well, she has 2 kids that are still alive, and she cared about them. She'd live for them. But well, that's not true either. I don't want to say that, like, people that kill themselves don't care about their kids. But you know what I'm saying? Like, that would be the most horrible thing in the entire world. But Diane didn't seem to give a shit. She didn't seem phased at all. She didn't cry. Of course, you can't blame how people act when they're grieving, right? Da-da-da-da. But it was notable enough that everyone who was there was kind of like, this bitch is acting fucking weird, right? And the doctor, one of the doctors who worked on her daughter, Christie, was like, this woman was complaining more about the fact that her kids got blood in her car than she cared more about that than the fact that her kids had produced the blood in the first place from being shot. You know what I mean? Also, and this little note got me, you know what she did while she was at the hospital? She made a phone call. And you know who she called? Robert, the guy who didn't want kids. And just for the record, because I'm not going to get into Robert anymore, and I don't want people thinking, like, did he have anything to do with it? Turns out, no. He actually was terrified of Diane once he found out what happened, because he believes that she shot her kids for him. And can you imagine how horrifying that would be, especially when, like, it didn't seem like he was that into her in the first place, and she went this far to try to, like, win his favor? Maybe, allegedly, we don't know. Anyways, Diane is taken down to the police station because they need to find out what happened here, because this is crazy. This is when she tells the police the story that I told you in the beginning, and she tells them all about, you know, the bushy-haired man and the shooting and how she freaking drove down to the hospital fast as fuck. Boy. But she also said that while she was driving, she was like praying to God, like, oh, I don't want them to die, but I also don't want them to suffer. So like, if you're going to take them, go ahead and just take them now. They go, they get her story, they get her description of the man, they get the location where the shooting took place, and they head there to look for evidence and see if they can find anything, but they don't find much that's useful. They also make like a composite sketch based on the description that she gave, but that didn't turn out to be super useful either. It seems like all the info Diane was giving was making it so that they couldn't really solve this case. So with no real leads, and I think them starting to kind of suspect Diane because it was clear that her story was sort of like bullshit, somebody gets the bright idea that they should do a reenactment of the crime. So they take Diane so that she can do a reenactment of what happened. And this was like recorded. There was like media there and shit like that. And she, though, should be traumatized. I cannot even imagine being put back in a car and no, absolutely not. But Diane was fine. Dude, she was chilling, not killing. She was just having a great time. She was like laughing and joking and like fixing her little fucking hair in the, I'm cussing a lot in this video. She makes me mad. Fixing her hair in the rearview mirror. She was literally joking and having a good time, like this was no big deal to her at all. During the time that police were investigating the murder and the attempted murders, Diane gave a lot of interviews, like some of the people that we talk about, like some of the people we discuss. She was one of those people that just like to talk and talk and talk. In these interviews, she would say weird things. Like when people started to question her because her story and her demeanor were sketch as hell, she was like, if I was trying to kill my own kids, don't you think I would have done a better job? Which, like, who says that, first off? And then Oprah, she was interviewed by Oprah, and Oprah even asked her, like, how did this random man in the middle of the dark know that you had 3 kids in your car if they were like laying down sleeping? Like, how did he even know that? Why would he go over there and just shoot them? It doesn't make any sense. And she was like, well, I didn't like get a chance to ask him. What do you want me to say? And in this interview, in these interviews, she talked about like blood pouring out of her kids' mouths. It was just like not a good look. She was also one of those people that just had ever-changing stories, where before she said it was one bushy man who attacked her. Now she was saying it was 2 men, and that these men knew who she was by name and knew about her tattoo, and that she knew who they were, and that if police weren't going to go and get them, she would go and get them herself. But she wouldn't tell police who they were, even though she knew. And speaking of people suspecting her, because this part like just irritated the hell out of me, so she starts being looked at as sort of a suspect. So she's no longer having custody of her kids, because like you probably shouldn't get to keep kids if you try to kill them. So she's left childless, and she decides like, I'll just make another one. And so she gets pregnant, and when she's asked like, why'd you do that? She's like, well, I like love kids and they make me feel fulfilled and like great, and now I don't have my kids, and I'm also never going to see Cheryl again, and they're so easy to conceive that I thought, why the hell not? It's just wild. This woman was so fertile. This woman was just so fertile, and it seems like such a waste because there's so many people out there that want to have babies and can't, and then this evil woman just gets to just make them on a whim whenever she wants. She said that she was just like, oh yeah, if I do it on this day, I'll get pregnant, and she was right. And it just seems like such a waste. She was so fertile, dude. This woman we're discussing was a surrogate at one point. She birthed a child for someone and got paid for it. What? Anyways, at this point, police are building a case against her because they believe that she's responsible and they believe that her story is bullshit. And they have it for a couple of reasons. First off, they just like have a hunch, but then they go with that hunch and it turns out that the evidence wasn't really lining up with Diane's series of events that night. For example, there was blood on the outside passenger door of the car, which didn't make any sense because her kids were shot in the car and she didn't say that she was fighting with the guy on that side of the car. So the blood was tested and it turns out it also wasn't Diane's blood. So how would it have gotten there if the kids were shot in the car and it wasn't Diane's blood? Well, it turns out it was believed to be Cheryl's blood, and they think that she got shot while trying to escape, and that's why her blood was on the outside of the car. In addition to that, she told police that she didn't have a gun. She had never had a gun. That wasn't her thing. But the lie detector determined that was a lie. And Steve told police that not only did she have one gun, she had two guns. And they were able to retrieve these when they did a search of her house. And they also found shell casings that matched the shell casings that were found at the scene from where her kids were shot. And last, they also found a witness. So, okay, remember Diane, someone shot her kids, and then she took off driving to the hospital. Well, this was somebody who was driving behind her after the shooting while she was on her way to the hospital. And remember how she said she was driving so fast to get the kids to the hospital as fast as hell? Well, turns out she was driving slow. Insanely slow, painstakingly slow. So slow that this car passed her. Now, you may be wondering, where are Diane's kids in all this? Well, Danny was little, right? So he didn't have much to say. And Christie had been, she had a stroke. She had to recover. And even when she was in the hospital, unable to speak because of what happened to her, anytime Diane came in the room, anytime her mom was near her, her heart rate shot through the roof. So that always made people super weird. Eventually, though, she does, get out of the hospital and she gets put into therapy. And she tells her therapist that, she knows who shot her, but she can't bring herself to say it. So her therapist is like, it's cool. I'm not going to press you. I'm not going to force you. This is on you. I'm here for you. But the therapist had a bright idea and was like, this is what we should do. Every session, I want you to write the name of the person who shot you and murdered your sister and tried to murder your brother. And then we'll just throw it in the fire each time so that you can get it out of yourself, but you don't have to tell me because you're not ready for that. And maybe one day you will be ready. And if you are, we'll deal with it then. So she did that each time. And finally, the day came where she didn't want to burn it. So she gave it to her therapist, and her therapist opened it, and it simply just said, my mom. 9 months after the murder, on February 28, 1984, Diane was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. And by the time she went to trial, she was heavily pregnant. Because remember, she got pregnant again. Hundreds of people showed up to the courthouse every day because it was a very publicized case. Diane did testify on her own behalf, and she talked about she's so annoying. She proclaimed her innocence, of course. She said that the police were actually framing her, and that's how the evidence was found against her, the bullet cases and things like that. And then she equated her bizarre behavior to her troubled childhood. And then original Casey Anthony, really, she took a page from Casey Anthony's book, or rather, Casey Anthony took a page from Diane Downs' book, and she claimed that her childhood was so traumatic because her father had sexually abused her for years. Which her father denied doing, and later Diane claimed, I just made that all up. The prosecution presented their case, the shell casings, the witness who drove behind her after, the blood spatter, and if all that wasn't enough, Christie took the stand, a literal baby testifying against her own mother. And when she was asked if she knew who shot Cheryl, she said yes, and she said she knew because she had watched it happen. She then told the court what happened that night. She says that her and her family had been driving along when her mother pulled the car over, got out, and went to the trunk to get something. She said her mother came back, leaned in the car, shot Cheryl, who was in the front seat, and then turned and shot her and her brother Danny at point-blank range. One thing that Christie remembered that was very notable, because you know how when something traumatic happens, or really anything happens, certain senses can be more triggered? Well, it seems like hearing, sound, was really triggering for her, because she remembered specifically that when this all happened, the song Hungry by the Wolf was playing on the radio. And so they played this in court to like probably be dramatic and make a point, right? But when they played it, Diane tapped her foot, she bobbed her head, she danced to the song that traumatized her daughter, the song that her other daughter died to, and that all her kids were shot to. She danced to it. The jury unanimously found Diane Downs guilty of all the charges, and while in jail awaiting sentencing, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Ultimately, Diane was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 50 years. One of the prosecutors in the case, his name was Fred, he and his wife actually adopted Christie and Danny, which I thought was very sweet. And then the baby that was born while she was in jail ended up getting adopted out to some loving family, and the baby's name ended up being Rebecca. Now, initially, Rebecca's family wasn't going to tell her who she was because, like, who would want to know that, you know? But I guess she did find out. She went about her business. She did her, you know, whatever. She found out. She watched a documentary and read a book on her mother, and she decided that she wanted to know her, which is like her choice. Do what you want to do. I guess she like reached out to her mom and they talked for a while. And then the conversation started to get really weird, and she got to a point where she didn't want to talk to her anymore. Now, this all seems wild and it seems like I've given you all the information, but there's one more thing I want to tell you about Diane Downs, because this woman is just crazy. Apparently, this woman straight up escaped from prison. I guess she was hanging out in the yard doing her thing when she scaled this tall ass fence that had barbed wire at the top. She took off her coat. She threw it over the blades. She slithered her little snake ass down, and then she hid under a car and waited till the coast was clear, and then she booked it. So there was like a large scale search for her, and it was like in several states just trying to find her. So while she was on the run, the prosecutor who had, you know, her two kids and the family who had the baby were terrified that she was going to show up, try to try to get her kids back, or try to like exact revenge on Christie for testifying against her, whatever. So the prosecutor like kept a gun on him at all times in case she showed up. And then the baby, Rebecca's family, had to like let the preschool and people in her life know who she really was, which was, they didn't want to have to tell at that point, but they didn't have a choice. But they needed to let them know so that they could keep an eye out for her. Now, they did end up finding Diane because they searched her cell, and there wasn't much there, but there was a pad of paper. And on the paper that was there was like an indentation, so they did that old thing. Remember we talked about this in the Larry Jean Bell case, where they were able to like, you know, figure out what was on the page before it. I used to do that with eyeshadow for like, to figure out my Christmas presents when I was a kid. I'd dust eyeshadow over my mom's notepad so I could see what it said. Sorry, Mom. But they didn't do that because they're, you know, more professional than I am. But they were able to see that there was like a map strip drawn out. So basically they tracked her down to this home where the map led, and this home belonged to another woman she had been in jail with, and like her husband was living there. I guess both women were planning to escape together, but Diane just went and shacked up with this woman's husband. So 2 weeks after she escaped, she was escaped. Did I say that right? Yeah. I thought I said escaped, and I hate when people do that. So 2 weeks after she escaped, she was arrested. When she was arrested, she was wearing this guy's t-shirt and boxers. So I bet that lady regrets giving her directions to her house now. For the record, after escaping, she told police that she escaped because she was innocent and she had to track down the real murderer of her daughter, because it wasn't her. Shaggy. Do your best Shaggy impersonation. It wasn't me. So Diane Downs is in jail. She's tried to get parole on more than one occasion, but she keeps getting turned down, which is good. She's exactly where she should be because, in my opinion, just mine, she is an evil biatch. And now I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. What do you believe was Diane's motive for trying to kill all of her kids? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. With that said, that is the story of Diane Downs. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I just want to thank you for remembering her sweet babies with me today, Cheryl, Christie, and Steven. Before you leave, please don't forget to let me know what cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and every time you leave a suggestion, I put your name on it. I put your suggestion on a list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. Before you go, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my merch store and to my membership, where you can get early access to non-sponsored videos, live streams, things like that. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.